Welcome to the sixth round. I'm your host, Naveed Razi, alongside award-winning journalist for MMA Junkie and USA Today, John Money Morgan, live from Las Vegas, Nevada. And John, I'm definitely going to have to eat some crow here. Not only did I think that Alexander Gustafsson was not a very viable opponent against Jon Jones going into 165, but I think he might have actually won that fight.
Yeah, man, I don't think you're alone in that. I mean, the odds makers obviously had it as a typical Jon Jones fight, very one-sided in nature. And, I saw a lot of even journalists kind of making fun of the tagline, the greatness within reach, and saying, oh, come on, man, this reach has nothing to do with how this fight is going to play out. But I think it did, man. I think Alexander Gustafsson put on a fantastic performance. The reach certainly played with it, especially, you saw Jon Jones just kind of like reaching out, sticking his hand, and he couldn't do that because Alexander could still hit him like that. But the other thing was the wrestling, both the defensive wrestling and the takedown as well from Alexander Gustafsson. I mean, just an incredible performance.
The most impressive thing to me, I mean, there were so many impressive things to take away from Alexander Gustafsson in that fight. One, I thought his striking, especially his boxing, he didn't really implement his legs too much, but I thought his boxing was so fluid and looked so good. And I don't know if I just didn't realize how good his boxing was coming into that fight, John, or if he had just taken his boxing game to a completely different level in that Jon Jones fight. But there was no wasted movement in that fight. When I watched him boxing Jon Jones up like that, I thought this guy could actually go over to boxing and maybe hang with some guys over there. Not saying anything crazy that he could go over there and win a title, but his boxing looked better than anybody I can remember looking at that light heavyweight division.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. It's that Dominic Cruz style that they train in that camp, man. Always said it sounds kind of funny, especially with now that Dominic Cruz has been sitting on the bench for so long. But I always thought that Alexander Gustafsson, moved like a 205-pound Dominic Cruz. They all train together with kind of that Eric Del Fierro style there. I know that there may be some changes, it sounds like, moving forward in Alexander Gustafsson's camp. He's going to spend some more time in Sweden, but the time he spent in San Diego really paid off. And, the boxing looked great. Again, the defensive wrestling, vastly underrated there. I think a lot of people, didn't realize how much he'd benefited from all that work with Phil Davis, and the defensive wrestling was fantastic. And then just the heart. I mean, just the incredible amount of heart that the guy showed. Even in a losing effort, and you started off, by saying, hey, listen, some people think he won the fight. You can make a case that he won the fight. I actually had the fight scored 4-1 for Jon Jones. But that said, rounds 2 and 3 were incredibly close. So if you come to me and say, because I've seen it both ways. I've seen a lot of people that had it 3-2 Jon Jones, but that, some people gave 2 to Jon Jones. Some people gave 3 to Jon Jones. So, I mean, they were just very, very close rounds. I actually went both rounds to Jon Jones, which is how I got to that 4-1 score. But I'll tell you what, it was so close. Even if you said 4-1 the other way, if you said, okay, I thought Alexander won 1, 2, and 3 were close, and then I thought he even won round 4 because, yes, he did get rocked by that spinning back elbow, and that's what really changed the course of the fight. But he was winning that round up to that point. Yeah. And that was a very significant portion of the round. That spinning back elbow came in, I think, the last 90 seconds or so. And so I gave that round to Jon Jones. I thought it was enough to come back, but it was so close of a fight that I could even see somebody saying they had it 4-1 Alexander Gustafsson, and I wouldn't argue with them. And I think that's an incredible night for both those individuals and for the UFC, because now, all this time people are saying, I don't know about this Jon Jones. I'm not sure if he's for real or not. Let's see if he gets tested. He got tested and won. But Alexander Gustafsson, who to the average fan was an absolute no-name, now you're going to want to see that guy fight again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me to my next question, Don. It sounds like you're in the same position I am, where I thought Gustafsson won, you thought Jon Jones won, but neither one of us seemed very concrete in our decision to give that fight to the other guy. So that being said, why in the hell is Jon Jones fighting Glover Teixeira next instead of a rematch between Alexander Gustafsson?
It's funny because after the fight, we're there in the press conference and, there's a buzz. I mean, there's a real buzz where even the journalists are like, oh, my God, what did we just witness? This was amazing, and Dana gets up there. And it's kind of interesting. Like, neither main event fighter could come to the press conference. They both ended up at the hospital. In some ways, it kind of made it even cooler because, like, you can't even talk to the guys. You don't have to worry about them summing it up or giving any kind of quote. It's just, wow, we can sit there and talk about this fight. And, it seemed like right away we were going with the rematch, and we kept pushing Dana and saying, he'd say, well, sounds like, the rematch seems like a good idea, but he would never commit to it. And, in hindsight, it was funny because a couple days later he came to Las Vegas. There was the world tour with Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman, and I said, it kind of sounds like you're changing your mind a little bit. Like I'm just listening to the tone of your voice. Like maybe you're not going to do the rematch. And it was funny. Dana's quote was, "Come on, man, we were high. We were all high. We were buzzing. That adrenaline. We thought we have to see it again right away." Listen, Glover Teixeira, I think part of it is because I look at Glover Teixeira as a legitimate contender, and I think a lot of people don't. But I do. I've seen a lot of his fights from cage side. Even did commentary on one of his Shuto fights in Brazil. And I've seen him fight, and I know the type of power he possesses, man. He really does have that one-punch knockout power. And so I think that's one reason I'm not disappointed that Glover Teixeira is getting this fight. He is undefeated in the UFC. He does have a 20-fight win streak to his name, and he is a different test for Jon Jones. I don't think Jon Jones has fought anybody with the power that Glover Teixeira has. So, listen, I think Alexander Gustafsson, him and Jon Jones are both 26 years old. They're going to fight again. Now, there's no guarantees. Glover Teixeira could knock out Jon Jones in this title fight. Whoever Alexander Gustafsson ends up fighting, could end up winning there, and then you don't get to do the rematch right away. So there's no guarantees, and I think there is a little bit of a chance for disappointment there. And I point to Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner. We saw that fight, and a lot of people wanted to see it again right away, and we didn't see it right away. And by the time we finally booked the rematch, it was just like, whatever. Who wants to see it? And it didn't end up being the same fight. So I am a little concerned that might happen here, that when these two finally do come together, it won't have the same meaning.
Yeah.
But I got to be honest, man. I'm cool with it. I'm cool with Glover Teixeira stepping in.
That's what I'm really worried about, John, because this isn't like boxing where you're pretty much guaranteed to have guys see each other down the line. With MMA, things are so crazy, especially with the way these divisions are stacked up, that you may never have those guys see eye to eye and get back in the octagon and face each other again. And that's what I'm very worried about. I do think Glover Teixeira is whether he has a chance or not against Jon Jones remains to be seen, but we said the same thing against Alexander Gustafsson. But he is on a 7-fight win streak, which is very impressive, especially in that light heavyweight division, because it is so competitive, and the pot is just so small of very good guys who belong in that upper tier, upper echelon of fighters. But there's a few, to me, Glover Teixeira, even though he does possess that vicious knockout power, we saw him almost get knocked out in both his last two fights, against Ryan Bader and against Tahuna. So I think if you look at big picture, although I can't really be up in arms and disagree with the Glover Teixeira matchup against Jon Jones, I kind of am pouting a little bit that why are we not seeing Jon Jones and Alexander Gustafsson, especially, you mentioned that Dana White was riding that high after that fight, but I heard from multiple people, and this is guys like yourself who've been covering the sport for 10, 15 years, that they were arguing that this is one of the best fights they've ever seen, especially at the championship caliber level. So all things being considered, John, I'm having trouble wrapping my brain around why they wouldn't make an immediate rematch between Jon Jones and Alexander Gustafsson. The only thing I can think of is the UFC being the marketing and PR machine that they are. The longer this draws out and the more chance that they have to build these two guys up, it can make this thing even a bigger fight than it would have been if they did an immediate rematch. But as you mentioned, we've seen how the cards fall in this sport, and that's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed, so it is kind of a risky play. Here's the only other wild card I would throw out there, and I don't know this. This is not, I do have an opportunity to talk to a lot of guys behind the scenes of the UFC. This is not something I heard from them, so I want to make that very clear. But the other theory that I thought was, at least if you break them apart, now you have two main events instead of one. They're going back to Sweden. Obviously, you put Alexander Gustafsson in the headliner there in Sweden and Stockholm. Place will go nuts. I mean, I've been there with him fighting there. Obviously, he didn't get to fight last time, but the first time they were in Sweden, it was incredible. I mean, the guy's a celebrity there. And, of course, Jon Jones and Teixeira has been announced for headlining the Super Bowl card in New Jersey. So that's my, if we're going to take the emotion out of it and the fight fan out of it and look at it from a business perspective and why they might want to do it, that would be my only guess, is now they get two main events instead of one. And you keep your fingers crossed. If they both win, you bring them back together for that massive rematch. If one of them loses, well, you're kind of stuck. You know what I mean? But if they both headline an event, they both are going to sell out an arena. And then if they both win, you bring them back together for an epic rematch.
Yeah, two things. One, I know you said you thought Jon Jones won that fight, but oh my God, if you saw his face after that fight, I don't know. It looked like Jon Jones just got mugged by about 17 guys, and and Alexander Gustafsson just kind of was strolling through the park there, but just was kind of tired. One. Second, who would Alexander Gustafsson's next opponent be in your mind?
I don't know. There's none that seem to make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. I mean, Little Nog is out there, I guess. Phil Davis, there's rumors that, the reason Alexander went back to Sweden to train is because maybe they're going to set up something with Phil Davis. I don't know, man. Those guys seem like buddies now.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's more than just a training partner. So I got to be honest, there's not a lot of fights that make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. Ironically, I guess the fight that I thought really did make the most sense was Phil Davis and Glover Teixeira for an absolute number one contender fight. Then you would have no denying who's the number one contender. So, I guess maybe we'll have to wait and see what plays out over the next couple weeks and get something out of the fights happen. Because as far as what's out there right now, I'll be honest, I don't see anything that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense.
I don't either. It's going to be we're going to have to keep our eye out to see how this whole thing unfolds. I'm with you. I don't see Alexander Gustafsson and Phil Davis fighting, but I do have to give Phil Davis props because he schooled Alexander Gustafsson in that wrestling game. Who the hell thought we were going to see Alexander Gustafsson taking Jon Jones down in that fight and stuffing 9 of his takedowns? So a crazy fight. I hope we get to see it again. In the meantime, we'll have to look forward to Jon Jones and Glover Teixeira and see what's next for Alexander Gustafsson. For Naveed Razi, MMA Wayne, this is the 6th round. John Morgan in Las Vegas for MMA Junkie and USA Today. Be sure to check out all his stuff on there. We will catch you next week for another episode of the 6th round.